Hey everybody, I'm the Drink Pro. Today we're drinking Alberta Premium Cask Strength Rye. What's up everyone, Drink Pro here. Happy to be with you guys again. I'm excited today because I get to try a bottle that I was a little ahead of the curve on. Not to pat myself on the back too much, but Jim Murray, who's sort of famous or infamous in the whiskey world, has released his Whiskey Bible. And this book goes through a lot of different types of whiskey and, brands and even specific pours and specific variations. It gets very into the nitty-gritty. But every year, a new version is released that includes a Whiskey of the Year. Jim Murray calls it the World Whisky of the Year. And the World Whisky for the Year for 2021 was Alberta Premium Cask Strength Rye. Now, there are a lot of mixed opinions about Jim Murray because his Whiskey Bible yearly releases, first off, have occasionally had bottles that were, I'll say, questionable as World Whisky of the Year winners. And another thing that becomes problematic is when people read this book, then they go out and buy this bottle without knowing much about whiskey. So there's a lot of novices buying up whiskeys that some of us experienced drinkers wish we could go out and grab. Now, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. If you're a novice and you grab some interesting bottles because someone told you to, I don't really have a problem with that. I think the bigger issue is not knowing what to expect. If somebody says, oh, do you like ryes? And you don't know, don't go buy a hard-to-find expensive rye. And that's not a knock on you as a consumer. That's a knock on you as not being self-aware enough. You got to know what your palate looks for. Before I get too far into the weeds on this whiskey, I want to mention this is the time to join the Patreon. If you've been thinking about joining, but you haven't joined yet, get it done by the end of this month. Why? Because in October, I'm going to be doing a drawing and somebody's going to be getting a nice bottle of whiskey. That really requires you to have already been in the Patreon before October. The way the payment schedule works is it pays again at the beginning of each month. So October 1st payment, that's your last chance to enter. So join now and you'll have a chance to win a really cool bottle. I don't have the specific bottle picked out yet. I'm going to say it's very likely to be an allocated bourbon, just because of what I can get my hands on and what I like. It's going to be an allocated bourbon almost certainly. So in the 2021 Whiskey Bible, Jim Murray gives the Alberta Premium a 97.5 out of 100, a very good score. But he's no stranger to Alberta Premium. He's been sort of preaching them as one of the most underrated distilleries for a long time. And in fact, for 4 different years, I think it was 06, 07, 08, and 09, Alberta Premium Cask Strength Rye was rated his best Canadian whiskey in the world. It's not really a surprise that he named it Whiskey of the Year, although it is only the second time he's ever named a Canadian whiskey Whiskey of the Year. Ironically, both times it was a rye. I don't want to spend too much time on Jim Murray, though. I could go on and on about the benefits and the negatives of having someone do the kind of thing he does, but I'd rather focus on the whiskey because that's really what this is all about for me. I'm really happy that he named this Whiskey of the Year because it got some recognition. I'm sad I won't be able to get it as easily, but it was never particularly easy to get here in the United States. Alberta Distillers is actually owned by Beam Suntory, but they're a Canadian distillery that's sort of under the conglomerate umbrella, and about half of the whiskey that they make is actually being sourced. Whistle Pig is a really well-known brand that sources rye from Alberta Premium. So if you see Whistle Pig and you see Canadian rye, there's a good chance that it's going to be coming from them. Same thing with Barrel. A lot of the Barrel Canadian whiskeys seem to be Alberta products as well. I think Jefferson might have a rye that's Alberta. They're pretty well established in the sourcing world, more akin to NGP than some of the other large distillers who don't do much sourcing. Now, unlike a lot of the ryes that I review on this show and that I enjoy personally, this is 100% rye. It's not a blend. It's not just technically meeting the definition with 51% rye. No, it's 100% prairie rye grain. What's interesting is that they use a combination of malted and unmalted rye. So you're going to get some of that sweetness of a malting process and some of the spiciness. One final thing before I get to the actual tasting. This is actually a relatively budget whiskey. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not $10 or $20, but it's got this box, and as soon as you pick it up, you can kind of feel it's relatively cheap. And the bottle and the branding is not going to blow anybody out of the water. This does not look like a premium bottle. It isn't a premium bottle. It's $40 approximately US as an MSRP, if you can get it. But it's not particularly expensive. It's got a screw top, which I've kind of had some strong opinions about in the past. Shout out that Maker's Mark video I made. But, this is not some big, illustrious, expensive, hard-to-get whiskey. It may be the last one, But that's more of an issue of location than it is of scarcity in this context. I will also note that Alberta Premium Cask Strength does say limited edition on the bottle. I don't know how limited it actually is. I don't know how hard it actually is to find. I believe Calgary is where they are located in Canada. But it is at 65.1%, so it's a relatively high proof rye whiskey. So let's go ahead and pour this out and give it a nosing and taste. This is genuinely one of my favorite ryes that I own. I was actually going to review a sample from one of my patrons. Sorry, Mark. I'll get to that next week, I promise. He's been asking for me to review a sample of his for a long time, and I've got several, but a lot of them are sort of set up for different uses. Like, I've got a really cool wild turkey lineup coming up soon. We'll leave that for another day. Today, let's focus on the Alberta Premium. Let's go ahead and nose this. Now, I'll tell you right off the bat, it does not smell like it's 65% alcohol, and it doesn't really smell like it's a rye. Maybe it smells like a high rye bourbon, but it's so sweet. There's a lot of like caramel and cinnamon, lots of baking spice. You get a little bit of that rye spice underneath. It's sort of like a rye bread, though. It's very bready. It's like a combination of this sort of sweet dessert rye bread. It's a really cool smell. That rye grain is not lost, but so many sweet aromatics. The butterscotch, the honey, the caramel, the vanilla. It's beautiful whiskey. It reminds me a lot of a bourbon, to be honest. The only reason I know it's not a bourbon is because of that very distinct, sharp rye, I want to say like a higher note, but really it's not. Compared to a lot of the ryes I've had, the rye is relatively mellow in this. It's prominent, but it's not sharp and aggressive. It's relatively mellow. Oh yeah, and as you let it sit in the glass for a while, I start to get this clove note, this sort of peppermint note. This nice light herbal quality shows up. I would almost call it floral, but not quite. Usually I think of floral as being sweeter, but as this has settled in the glass, the sweet aromatics are sort of giving way to this nice, light herbal component, which is really beautiful. Herbal ryes are a lot more traditional rye in my mind, so it's kind of fun to see that initial sweet punch, but then a return to a more standard rye profile on the nose as I leave it in the glass. I could just sit there and nose this forever, so I better get to tasting or else we're going to have a 40-minute video and I can't edit that. I also get fresh peaches, a pine wood, like fresh cut pine, and a little bit of like an almond extract maybe. So many good notes. I really need to taste this. Okay, here we go. Oh. If you know somebody that doesn't like ryes and does like things at cask strength, give them this. Give them this and say, I dare you to not like this. I don't know how they do it, because it is just a beautiful presentation of the sort of different direction a rye can go. It's very non-traditional in a rye sense. Oh, and the finish is so long. Oh, so good. First thing you taste is the rye grain. Immediately you know it's a rye, but then very quickly that kind of goes away and you get this malty sweetness. That half malted, half unmalted rye really shows up there right at the beginning. That's pretty cool. I get like a chocolate cereal kind of note, like a less sweet version of Cocoa Puffs maybe. And then the mid palate shows up very nutty. I get a lot of nuttiness, I get a little bit of woodiness, and it's kind of fun. The baking spice shows up at the end for me. I get a little bit of nuttiness and woodiness mid-palate, and then this almost like bready baking spice, like Christmas flavor shows up. It's a very personal memory for me. Every Christmas morning, we would have this coffee cake. It was basically dessert for breakfast, so it really lingers in my mind, but it was a sweet bread, essentially, with dates, and it had some nuts in it. I think usually we'd go with pecans, but it really reminds me of that on the finish, and that just lingers with you in the back of your palate with just hints of oak in between. Oh, so beautiful. I mean, I'm gushing over this whiskey because it really just showed me what a rye could do. It showed me how good ryes can be. There is one other whiskey that I'll review at some point this year that has showed me what a rye can really be, but it's a lot harder to find than this. Comes from our friends at Willett, so that's a little sneak preview. I keep coming back to it, and there's a little bit of pepper starting to show up in the mid-palate and finish. A little bit of lemon zest as well. God, that finish is just so good. It's so wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I honestly wish I had reviewed this sooner. It's nice to be able to do a quick turnaround on a video and get this out just after Jim Murray releases his Whiskey Bible, but the unfortunate reality is this is a fantastic whiskey that just became a lot harder to find. So I appreciate that it's getting some respect because it deserves it. But the problem with that is it makes it harder for me to get my hands on it. So buy one if you can find it. Do it because I said it, not because Jim Murray said it. And in the meantime, I'm going to keep drinking like a professional, and you should too. Cheers, guys.